Hey Optimants, it's Chris here. So this video came out last week. It's titled, What are the 2024 5th edition core rulebooks for D&D? It's just 12 minutes long. I originally recorded a reaction that I didn't bother releasing because I finished the video and I didn't have a whole lot to say about it, and the whole thing seemed kind of milquetoast. However, I've watched it a couple times now, and I think there's a lot to read between the lines. Rather than play the video, I'm just going to run through the information quickly, then take a bit more time to process what's being told to us. So, first off, we're told that in order to differentiate the current Player's Handbook and the upcoming one, the design team has been using 2014 Player's Handbook and 2024 Player's Handbook instead of 5th edition versus 1D&D 5.5 or 6th or whatever, because as they've made it abundantly clear, they have no intention of referring to the new core rulebooks as any edition other than 5th. I'd argue that if you change enough that you need to print new books, it's at least 5 point something. I mean, you could arguably say we haven't been playing edition 5.0 ever since Tasha's gave us a bunch of optional class features and the ability to juggle ability score bonuses. But my main concern about calling the new core rulebooks 5th edition is how do we differentiate between two 5th edition players' handbooks, DM's guides, and monster manuals? Well, 2014 and 2024 Player's Handbook? Okay, I'll try it out, I'll give it a spin, see how it feels. So for the rest of this video at least, it'll be the 2024 Player's Handbook we're talking about. Forget about what edition it is. And why do they want to keep calling it 5th edition? Well, because it's sales, of course. Jeremy Crawford says it in the video. Sales of 5th edition books are good, and they want to keep selling them. I mean, fair enough. You know, we've seen the same kind of thing pop up, like in software. Like if we look at Microsoft Windows. Started out Windows 1, 2, 3. Then there were little updates in those, so there was a 3.1 and a 3.2. Then they switched to the year. So there was Windows 95 in 1995, Windows 98 in 1998, and Windows 2000 in the year 2000. Then they went to different names like XP and Vista. Then they went back to edition numbers. So we had Windows 7, 8, 10, 11. I mean, whatever. They want years, whatever works. Back to the video, we're told that the 2024 core rulebooks will include new material and material from the 2014 core rulebooks that has been refined, but most of the material will actually remain the same. Even changes we've seen in the playtest process up to now, if it's not been exciting the community, they aren't going to spend much effort to adjust it, and for the most part, it's just going to go away. They'll revert to whatever we had in 2014. Jeremy Crawford says that the first playtests were basically deliberately more experimental, partially to see what big ideas were embraced by the community, but also to measure the community's appetite for big changes in the 2024 core rulebooks. He says in this video that this part of the process, the testing new ideas and seeing what excites the community, that chapter, is drawing to its end. And in upcoming playtests, we'll see, actually, let me just quote him word for word. People are going to see in upcoming Unearthed Arcanas a return to many familiar things from the 2014 books, but now with some of the new material incorporated. He gives the example that standardized subclass progression is being abandoned, and the revised subclasses will once again progress at the rate they did in the 2014 Player's Handbook, other than the 3rd level starting point. That bit they're keeping. So, for example, the next Sorcerer release will get their subclass at level 3, but then the subclass features will be at 6, 14, and 18 instead of 6, 10, and 14. Because to the designers, the standardized 3rd level start was important to them as a design goal, but the standardized progressions after 3rd level weren't. And the community seemed to be okay with standardized progressions, but being okay with it wasn't enough to keep it. This was bigger news than I originally thought about on first watching, and I'll be talking more about this. He tells us the next playtest will include the next iterations of the experts and priests, and he says it's going to look a lot more like the 2014 versions than the first playtest did. And essentially the stuff they've already introduced that was really popular will remain, and the stuff that wasn't isn't being replaced, they're just getting rid of it. Now, where this gets interesting is when we talk about things like maybe the Druid Wild Shape, because we know they don't want to keep the 2014 version, but we know that the playtest version was not well received. So then they're kind of in a pickle, because They can't just go back to the 2014 version. So in that case, I imagine they're just going to have to come up with something else, which I imagine is not going to be particularly revolutionary. If I was to guess, I'd say it's probably going to look a lot like the 2014 version, except we'll have like a curated list of creatures to choose from. Finally, he discussed that one format change they've been experimenting with is capitalization of words that actually have a game mechanic. So if they say poisoned with no capital, they're just referring to the English word. If they say poisoned with a capital, then they are referring to a game mechanic that you either already know or probably should look up. And that's what was in the video. So now some of my thoughts. So the playtest process started in August 2022, meaning we're about 10 months in. They have committed to the new books being published in 2024, that's next year, and even if that's the end of next year, we shouldn't expect any playtest material to be released beyond, I'd say, at best, the midpoint of 2024, because they have to have time to collect and analyze feedback. And we're approximately halfway through the process already. They might even stop with the playtests earlier than that. And we currently have 5 playtest packets. There was Origins, then Expert Classes, Clerics and Species, Druids and Paladins, and most recently what they called Playtest 5, which was Mages, Barbarian, and the Fighter. So my best guess would be about 5 more playtests for the 2024 rulebooks, maybe 6, but I doubt we'll see more than that. So let's say 10 or 11 playtests total, including the 5 we've already seen. In the next playtest, which will be playtest 6, we are going to see the second version of Expert and Priest classes, as well as likely the first version of the playtest Monk. Now, Jeremy Crawford has said that some things just need to be changed, whether it's popular or not, whether it's for balance reasons or mechanical reasons or updating things that have become dated compared to modern releases. However, a lot of the changes we've seen up to now are experimental, just as a way to gauge how the community receives these bigger and less imperative ideas. Based on what Jeremy Crawford has said in this interview, it sounds like that part of the playtest is mostly done. And what we'll see going forward will likely not be so much the presentation of big new ideas, but instead the abandonment of the big new ideas that didn't get survey responses that indicated that the community was delighted by these changes. And not to replace them with new big ideas, but instead just largely revert to what we already had in the 2014 Player's Handbook. So if you were hoping for big new changes yet to come, at least when it comes to the classes, it seems unlikely that's going to happen. So for example, we know the new version of the Rogue Sneak Attack, which limited sneak attack to the player's turn only, didn't score very well. I believe it got below a 70% approval, which is low as far as survey responses go. So when I heard it didn't score well, and they were going to abandon what they had tried in the Expert Classes document, I was speculating what comes next. What would I like to see with sneak attack? And I discussed with members of my community what we would like to see going forward. Seems like all of that just isn't going to happen. What's going to happen is the sneak attack we're going to see in the next playtest, almost for sure, it's going to be the 2014 version of sneak attack. They're just going to put it back. They might change the wording a little bit, but mechanically, it's basically going to stay the same. The time for big new ideas for this kind of thing is over. And the upcoming Rogue is going to be the final Rogue we see in playtest form. They'll collect survey responses, and then the next time we see the Rogue in print, it will be official content in the 2024 Player's Handbook. At least, it will be assuming it doesn't tank in survey responses, which I don't think it will. Generally, if you keep something the same as it is now, the overall response will be, sure, fine. Which, if they're keeping something the same, is good enough. If it's an unnecessary change, then it isn't good enough. Same goes for the Cleric, Druid, Paladin, Bard, and Ranger. I think the next playtest will be the last time we see these classes until the 2024 Player's Handbook. And I don't think we'll see any big new ideas for any of these classes in the next playtest. Stuff we liked will remain, maybe get some tweaking, like proficiency bonus per long rest stuff might get tied to class levels instead, but I wouldn't expect to see any groundbreaking stuff for any of these classes, and likely they'll all look more like their 2014 versions than they did in the first Unearthed Arcana that we saw them. Any change has the cost of being less compatible with previous material, so they aren't going to do it unless it's required for future expansion of the game, like Arcane, Divine, and Primal spell lists, for balance or clarity reasons, or if it was something we responded to with excitement and delight. If it's achieving none of those things, then it's not worth the cost of being less compatible. So we have the experts and priests and presumably the monk in the next playtest, maybe later this month. That's 7 classes, so I wouldn't expect much more in that playtest. That alone is going to make it a hefty document. Then another playtest every 2 to 3 months until spring, maybe summer of next year. And that's going to leave us maybe 4 more playtests total, maybe 5. And what is going to be in those? Well, all the mages and warriors are going to need a second version. Again, probably looking more like the 2014 Player's Handbook versions. And that's going to be a whole playtest in itself. Then we've been promised 3 subclasses for every class. We've seen 1 for every class minus the monk. So that's 24 subclasses we have yet to see. Then we have about a quarter of the Player's Handbook dedicated to spells, and we've only seen a handful so far, so those will need to be released in a playtest. Then they said we'll see some Dungeon Master's Guide stuff and Monster Manual stuff in playtests. Well, okay, but now we're getting super tight. We have second draft mages, warriors, 2 more subclasses for every class, spells, then 2 core rulebooks, all packed into 5 or 6 more playtests. And what that really tells me is that, like, when I saw first level feats and then 4th level feats and 20th level feats, I was wondering, are we going to see 8th level feats? Well, it does not look likely. If we see feats in a future playtest, it's likely just going to be some tweaking on first drafts we've already seen. The time for big new ideas like that appears to have passed. So what this tells me is that after the first and second playtests, it was astonishing how much was being changed. Looked like the 2024 Player's Handbook would hardly resemble the 2014 version. But rather than continuing to see those kinds of changes going forward, instead, we're going to see the opposite, as playtests start to abandon the big new ideas we've been seeing, rather than introducing many more. I still don't see this being 100% backwards compatible, but it sounds like the 2024 Player's Handbook will be more backwards compatible than the playtest is in its current form. Those are just some observations and predictions I've accumulated since watching this video that I thought I would share. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.